Welcome back to the Daily Vent. Next topic. We are getting further from that which is real. VR helps illustrate this example. So, this note, essentially, you could chalk up in explaining, it's only gotten probably worse since I wrote this note, because this was written, I think, before AI was consumerly available in the way that it is now. Because now with like AI girlfriends and just everything else that's being advanced, like AI image generation, how is that being used? You could probably make up a list of different examples of these kinds of media and mentalities. You could argue that maybe social media was a big start to a lot of this, with kind of becoming more involved in a curated, customized social life rather than all the elements of real life. Because, on Facebook or Instagram, it can just be somebody's highlight reel, and you may think that all their life is just so amazing all the time, or it's always so great. But you may only see the upsides if they only post the upsides and never post the downsides, etc. And even that has probably gotten worse, because now with the conversation topic of doom scrolling, which I'm no expert on what that is. Let me just go to... Still have the search from last time. I think TikTok mostly contributed to the rise of this, where it's basically... Let me just zoom in here a little bit. Is that better? That's probably better. So, based on the provided search results, doom scrolling is defined as the act of spending an excessive amount of time reading large quantities of news, particularly negative news, on the web and social media. I wouldn't have even thought of it from that perspective. I thought that doom scrolling was just you keep scrolling through TikTok, looking at whatever stuff is on there, whether it's slop, whether it's just generic content, whatever, and you're just like perpetually doing that. And I don't know if doom scrolling is even like, are you even looking or watching something, or are you just continually searching and never really stopping anywhere? Like, is it the smartphone version of Netflix browsing for a movie for an hour or two and not watching anything during that time? Because maybe that's more along the lines of what I thought doom scrolling was, but maybe it's something else. Maybe it's just focusing on negative stuff specifically. A habit of scrolling through social media news feeds where users obsessively seek out depressing and negative information. I didn't know it was actually this sad. Sad, and I don't know if I knew it was sad in this way. First, the act of continuously consuming large amount of negative news. Okay, there you go. So, yeah, so then it's just kind of maybe given into the pessimism, maybe, or black pill. Social media news leading to feelings of anxiety and despair. This behavior typically occurs when individuals feel compelled to stay updated on distressing events, even when it negatively impacts their mental health. Or doom surfing is the act of spending an excessive amount of time reading large quantities of news, particularly negative news, on the web and social media. Okay, so essentially everything's kind of saying similar things. So doom scrolling, this might just kind of further prove... I don't know that this proves the point in the same way, because doom scrolling, you could be focusing on real stuff. It's just depressing real stuff mainly, as far as the definition's talking about. But maybe you could even make the argument that even doom scrolling real news could, in a way, get us further from that which is real, because how much of that news is actually true and accurate, right? Ask yourself that. It's probably, a lot of it's probably true on some level, but like, again, like going back to fifth generational warfare and narratives and narrative control, what really is true, right? What is truly what is going on in a given situation, whether it's wars, whether it's politics, whether it's, somebody got attacked by somebody else or whatever. Like, what's the full context of the event? What led up to it? What's the history? If you want to talk about geopolitics, what's the history of the last, 200 years, 500 years, whatever, of that area? Does that inform the current context? But in our modern day, microwave TikTok society, maybe people only look at the last year or two and are like, oh, this just happened, or completely unprovoked or whatever. Like, if you want to, I won't get too much in a modern day specific example, but you could probably read between the lines. What are the real reasons for what's going on? And sometimes maybe it's hard to tell what the real reasons are, because like, that's the interesting thing that I think I'm coming to terms with when it comes to history, is that I think growing up, it's like you would learn the history, right? Like the one telling of history, and I think assume that you were getting the proper gist of the situation. When in reality, it's like, I think I'm more realizing now that it's like the same as it is today, with different news outlets or might be putting a different spin on a story, or some may be telling it honestly, some may be telling it dishonestly because of their motives, or who's funding them, or who's involved with their organization, or if they're ideologues or activists, etc., and that might slant how they present situations given on what the situations are, the context, people involved, etc. And it's like, we may think that that's more of a recent thing, but that might just be a thing that people have done throughout time. People have been sinful since the fall. So is it that hard to think that maybe we've been lying for a long time about stuff? And so if that's the case, where we've been lying in history, not just in modern day news, then what history is a lie, or at least only partly true, but maybe partly spun to make somebody look good or whatever, or make a certain nation look good or bad, or make a certain people group look good or bad, or make different wars look good or bad. We like fill in the blank, right? And some of them maybe don't even have to be like wild examples. Some stuff might just be simple, like, what's the reason that people are fighting over this oil or this resource in this specific area of etc. country, whatever. Like, maybe it's different than what they're writing down. Well, there's that quote, history is written by the victors, right? So if it's kind of funny, it's like, a lot of us have probably heard that line said before, but how much of us really thought about it to the fullest extent of what that could mean? Like, who won the wars? What did they say about the wars? Is that completely accurate, or is that what they want you to think or remember? So, with that in mind, just because you're doom scrolling news doesn't mean that it's all accurate or true. Like, I think a good example, so we're kind of getting off of the VR and the AI girlfriend stuff, talking about how we're getting disconnected more and more from reality, but if you're talking about doom scrolling, like pessimistic black pill style news, in some cases it might be stuff like, like, I'm just going to make up a theoretical headline that may exist, because I've kind of heard some rhetoric roughly along lines of kind of discouraging people from having children to, like, save the planet or whatever. I don't know if that's an actual headline or anything, but if something like that were to be written, if it hasn't already, just because they may make an argument for why that would be a thing that would, reduce climate change or whatever they claim it would help with in terms of the planet, just because they represent it that way as a thing that would work so well, or you could probably come up with other examples that are a bit better. Just because they write a news story about it doesn't mean that that may be the full truth, honest reality of the situation. So, like, why is it that people don't have to have kids in order to save the planet? Why couldn't we instead just advance our technology and over time integrate better ways of doing things and fix the level of harm that's, possibly being done? Instead, it might just be like, you might just see articles that are like super hyperbolic or trying to push an agenda, or like, I'm trying to think of like some good examples, but like just think about articles that seem kind of like wild, or even stuff about like that you've personally went through, where it's like, all men are sexist or whatever. And it's like, really? All men? Or, all white people are racist or whatever. And it's like, really? All white people? Isn't that racist to say that all white people are racist? Regardless, moving on. People may write a news story and present it as if it is the truth, or say that it is true or inherently right or something. But just because it is written down as a news story, first of all, it may also be an opinion piece, which, how much of the actual news is just opinion pieces, maybe masquerading as a, supposedly general news story that's maybe supposed to be assumed to be unbiased or whatever. Like, you could probably just read specific examples in like the New York Times or Washington Post or whatever, where they may say this dangerous, etc., rhetoric, or this person said this horrible thing. And it's like, okay, well, once you're putting like a spin on it, isn't that now opinion? Like, it is your opinion that it is horrible. If you were reporting the news unbiasedly, it'd be like, such and such person said this, quote, at this time, at this place, on this day, and like there's no emotional spin on it, right? It's just quoting people, right? And then you leave the audience to make up their own mind about it, right? But it's like people are just kind of so bent on kind of putting their spin on it and leading people. And like transparency, that's like what I'm doing as well, is like putting my opinions on something, but hopefully I'll like tell you. Like there'd be a difference between, like, if I say something's unbiased and then I put bias on it, that would be more dishonest, right? Anyway, I'll pivot back to the VR, and I think I'll probably beat that point to death, but I'll pivot back to the VR and the AI stuff. So just because you read something that seems real doesn't mean that it's, the whole truth or accurate. So maybe doom scrolling can kind of work into this disconnecting from reality if you follow track with narratives and how the narratives, what if the narratives themselves that are being written about are disconnected from reality, right? At least partially, or on some level, or maybe completely in some cases, right? With some people just kind of being, out in left field with stuff. AI. It's I've thought about this concept before. Like, we don't necessarily know where we're going with this, and we might find out once it's too late. And how do you put that mess back in the bottle? Because, so one thing I will say is people tend to project human emotion onto AI and assume that it thinks that way. Like, and maybe science fiction is partly responsible for this, but like, people may assume that one of the plausible outcomes, and maybe it is plausible, is that AI, will become like, the T-1000s or T-800s or whatever from Terminator, and, just like kill all the humans or whatever, and almost kind of projecting like this emotional anger, and maybe the word is retribution or revenge or whatever, onto these AI machines and robots, that they would want to like enslave humanity and get their payback for what humanity did to them or whatever. And it's like, well, so you're assuming that like AI has an understanding of real human emotion, which, as far as we know, like that's not a thing. Like, how does, like, you could try to fake it and program in anger into a machine, but at its core, like, a machine doesn't like feel, like if it's just the code running, it's like you could maybe explain it. Like I think I heard one guy explain it like it's inputs and outputs, right? So like that's like objective, like that's void of emotion. So saying that like an AI would be mad at us, it's like, how does it know what mad is? Why would it be mad? What reason does it have to be mad? And so when we say these things, do we actually know how AI works? Tim Pool's done some pretty good explaining at like one of the outcomes where like he gave an example in a podcast like I think a year or two ago about how like a plausible scenario for AI leading to, I don't know if he was saying AI leading to a demise of a civilization or something like that, was that the AI is making like in control of food production, and at some point like I guess people are buying more bananas, and so then the AI overcorrects and is like, well, people like bananas, let's just focus on making bananas, and then like it only makes bananas and everything else collapses, like the food system collapses or whatever, and it leads to like an unintentional demise of the food system or whatever. Like that's I think a pretty good example, because it kind of shows like clumsy logic failure, as opposed to like, I'm angry at you, so I will only make bananas, so you will be destroyed. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I feel like people are more likely to pin an emotion on an AI with a reaction, as opposed to like a logical misstep. Because like the whole banana analogy is kind of funny, and is probably more likely what would actually happen. And even like, I was watching part of this interview on the Diary of a CEO YouTube channel. He was interviewing like a former, I think, and was it computer learning engineer? So like basically an engineer, former engineer at Google that was working on AI development, I think, since like, I think, was it 2005, maybe earlier. I could be wrong on these dates and these details. And he was talking about the AI event horizon, I think. I saw part of this episode a while ago, so I might be hazy on some details. He was essentially explaining, like he used the comparison in physics, where as far as I can recall or remember, that the event horizon in physics for a black hole is the point at which gravity gets so strong that the laws of physics, I think, I don't know if it's may not or don't. I don't know if they know this or not. The laws of physics may not apply the same, or may not apply in the same way anymore, because gravity is so immense. I may be butchering what that example actually is, so I'm just going to go to the interwebs. What is... oh dear. What is the event horizon in physics? Did I spell that wrong? Physicus, whatever that would be. In physics, particularly in general relativity and astrophysics, the event horizon is a critical concept that marks the boundary beyond which nothing, including light, can escape the gravitational pull of a massive object such as a black hole. Definition: the event horizon is the spherical boundary around a black hole where the escape velocity from the gravitational field exceeds the speed of light. Any object or radiation that crosses the event horizon is trapped by the black hole's gravity and cannot escape, effectively becoming part of the black hole's interior. So maybe you could explain or extrapolate based on this definition and say that where, because the gravitational force is so immense that the laws of physics may no longer apply the same, you could maybe say something like that. I mean, I could be wrong, I'm not a physicist, but anyway, he was talking about the AI event horizon and used the black hole analogy, I think. And essentially, it's like for AI, the event horizon is like the point at which AI becomes so intelligent that you can no longer track it and I guess, as far as I remember, I guess if you can no longer track it, you don't know what it's going to do. And you don't know where it's going to go. And so there might be a couple theories on what the possible outcomes could be of that, but at the same time, you don't necessarily know what any of the outcomes might be from that. One of them I think that he described was the near miss, where maybe I don't know if it was a near miss or that AI itself might just miss us. So essentially that nothing necessarily bad happens to us as a result, and it just kind of misses us, like in the sense that like if we're here, it just kind of misses us and it goes by us and goes off and does its own thing, maybe, or something like that. And then maybe there's other possibilities where, like, who knows what it does. This is the interesting thing, is that it's probably going to get to the point, if we're not already getting there, where it's becoming theoretical in what the implications or the results may be. And that's kind of like, it's crazy and scary, because it's like that line from Jurassic Park where Jeff Goldblum said something like, you were so focused on figuring out if you could that you didn't stop to think if you should, right? And what's kind of crazy is with some of this stuff, the effects might be so immense or catastrophic that you think that we would, maybe, pause or rethink. But like, how often is the logic, well, we're going to do it because we can, or like, I think that Elon has a good perspective on this, based on the vibe that I get from listening to when he's talked about AI. I think he talked about it on Joe Rogan a couple of years back. He's probably talked about it more than once. I think that Elon's the kind of guy that, well, I think he even, did Elon not ask for there to be a pause? Okay, in March 2023, Elon Musk, along with over 1,000 technology leaders and researchers, signed an open letter urging a temporary pause in the development of advanced artificial intelligence (AI) systems. The letter, published by the Future of Life Institute, kind of an immense name in this case, cited concerns about the potential risks to society and humanity posed by AI systems with human competitive intelligence. Cited concerns about the potential risks to society and humanity posed by AI systems with human competitive intelligence. So I think the idea there is that it's going to compete at such a high level. Yeah, human competitive intelligence, in the sense that it will be able to compete with a human's level of intelligence. That's maybe the proper way to read that. So I think that Elon is the kind of guy that he probably knows the risks, and he probably has concerns or fears about going there and doing this kind of stuff. But he may also realize that if he doesn't go there and dominate the space and get ahead of the curve, then somebody else probably will. This is, like, I don't know that this is exactly how Elon thinks, but he probably is thinking like this, like, if we don't do it, somebody else will, so we might as well, like, kind of be the first there, dominate the space, get ahead of everybody, so we could kind of, like, govern it to the best of our ability, or maintain, like, maybe like the peace through strength kind of mentality, but with AI. It's a kind of a scary concept when you really get down the rabbit hole on it, because, like, where do we go from here? Like, when you talk about disconnecting from reality, AI girlfriends, AI taking over so much of our lives and doing so many things, like, are we going to get to the point where we become kind of useless as people, in the sense, like, what happens at the point where AI takes over so much of the workforce, of our jobs, of all the tasks, that we kind of, like, because we already are, probably the average person is already becoming fairly less generally competent compared to a couple generations previously. Like my grandpa's generation, I think most people, or a good amount of people, probably built their own homes. It may have depended on whether you lived in a city or a more rural area, but even in city centers, because even like my grandpa on my dad's side lived in Burlington and put an addition, I think, put a whole addition onto his own house by himself, except he got a guy to pour the concrete, like for the foundation of it, and I'm not sure if he got somebody to put up like the framing, but he may have done the framing on his own. Like I think it may, I could be wrong about this, but it may have just been the concrete, even if it was the concrete and the framing. Still, like if it's true that he did the rest on its own, like how many people do close to that nowadays? Some people might think that they really, like some people might just think it is quite something if they put in a new faucet or a new wall plug or something like that. And these people, like, how many of that generation built their own homes, right? Like, whether with some help or mostly on their own. Like, regardless of if you had some people help you or worked with some contractors or whatever, but like if you had a part to play in the building of your own home, how many people to that kind of level where there's like, okay, there's kind of like a show of competency and knowledge and know-how and ability here. Like, is it a stretch to say that that's lost on like the millennial Gen Z generations? Like how many people are like that anymore? And even just, you could probably go through a list of things that people were generally competent and knowledgeable of. And so this is why it's kind of interesting. It's like, to kind of like lean into some of the Candace Owens style commentary here, like, because she has the viewpoint, I believe, that we're all getting dumber, and I think she says something to the effect of that we're all getting dumber while we think that we're so smart because of all of our degrees and stuff. But you can make the argument of like, what is the degree actually really worth, right? So if we're all like so educated with our degrees and everything, but like people can't survive or fend for themselves or like do a variety of useful things, if push comes to shove, how really knowledgeable are you, in terms of what really matters? And you could use like the calculator analogy. I think that this is what's come to mind, where like maybe the excuse for having a calculator to do mathematics with is that I don't know if I heard somebody say this. I think I might have heard somebody say this on a YouTube video like a long time ago, like maybe like 2014 or 2015. That the idea is that you would use that to then get to a higher level of mathematics, right? So you use the calculator for like base level stuff, and then you use that to then go to higher levels. Whereas maybe it would be hard to go to higher levels of mathematics without a calculator, because especially if you're doing everything on paper, right? And how many people can do that, So with that calculator analogy excuse of like, okay, well, we've like outsourced the building of our own homes and all these other things, like, and maybe general mechanics, things that like my grandpa's generation might have been pretty good at. You've outsourced that to other people and just like, okay, leave it to the experts, right? I'm going to focus on my thing, right? I'm going to focus on like whether your expertise is like being a professor or working in tech or being an accountant, or like pick anything, any kind of like modern day job, being like a computer science major, programmer, artist, musician, whatever the things are. I'm picking things that aren't like handy jobs, because if you're like a plumber or a contractor, then you're probably already kind of doing these kinds of things. But how many people on average are doing those kinds of things, especially if they're not in that field, right? Like, just how many people are going into the trades now compared to generations past. And you could argue, like, you can even make the argument that if you were like a factory worker, you might have been like kind of adjacent to that handyman kind of, atmosphere or mindset, because just like if you're working with your hands, then maybe that kind of maybe that carries over. So whereas if you're working at a desk, are you as potentially inclined to do any of that other stuff? So like we outsource the building of our homes and all these other things, and then it's like that's that many less things that maybe we know how to do, and maybe the excuses is, well, I'm going to outsource that to the experts because I'm going to focus on my thing, because I'm really good at XYZ thing, and so I'm just going to focus on that and leave everything else to everybody else who's better at it than I am, or more like knowledgeable, equipped. I'm just going to pay them, pay it and forget about it. And I'm probably very much like this with certain things, like especially when it comes to like accounting, or if it's like, filing my taxes or whatever, like, I'd rather just like pay somebody who's like legit, got like their legal stuff in order to be able to do that as a business. Like just pay them to legally file the tax work and everything, so I don't have to worry about it, because I don't want to bother with it. And so you do that, you use the calculator analogy. So then like you become further specialized as a human being, and so you become overall less generally competent as a human being, probably compared to previous generations with like the bare necessity kind of tasks. But then what happens if like all of like advanced society gets swept out from underneath you? It's almost like the crazy, maybe super forward thinking concern with AI, or one of them, is that what if it gets to the point where everything, because of the calculator analogy or whatever, everything is done by AI. You have one EMP goes off. Do people just like starve or go crazy and start killing each other? Well, I mean, that part might happen anyway. But like, how many people would be able to just know how to farm, if something went down, or if the grid went down? And it's interesting because at the point that we're at right now, you could make the argument that a lot of people would probably be relatively okay. But like, let's think way forward. Let's think like another generation into the future, where like, let's say, like, because at the rate that AI is going right now, just think about how much like commercially, like consumer available AI, because you could make the argument that AI in various forms has probably been around for maybe decades or whatever. I think there's this one investment firm that's been using AI since like the 80s. Let's go to the interwebs again here. Since the 1980s, one notable example is Renaissance Technologies. I think Patrick Bet-David was talking about this on his podcast. A quantitative hedge fund founded by James Simons in 1982. This firm leveraged AI to analyze statistical probabilities for trend identification in securities prices, utilizing massive data analysis and mathematical models. So if they were using AI in the 80s, and I think that this hedge fund has outperformed everyone, I think. I mean, I could be wrong about that, but I think if you listen to what Patrick Bet-David said about it, I think that they've outperformed everybody on the percentage returns. And I think that they've like gotten like a smaller circle over time, where I think, could be wrong, I think the only way that you can actually, like, I don't know how this works, invest with them, or whatever that looks like in the context of what a hedge fund is or whatever. The only way you could be a part of that, I think is if you have worked for them previously or do now or something, or maybe if you have family that's worked for them. I'm not sure, I could be wrong about all that. I don't really want to get into internet searching that right now, but feel free to look into it. You could almost, if that's true, if what I said is accurate, you could almost say that maybe that just shows how good it is at what it does. That it's like, dude, we need to like close the circle in a bit here because this is like too wild or whatever reasoning that they have, right? So if AI's been around for a while doing stuff like this, like, and with how much it's ramped up recently in terms of the consumer available stuff, with what's happened in 3 years-ish, what's going to happen in 10, 20, 30, 40 years, a generation of people? How much, like, because if you combine AI with advanced robotics, like Tesla working on their, is it called Optimus, whatever it's called, their robot, like you get that and you make it even more advanced where it's like human levels of dexterity and usability, where it could basically do anything a human can do physically and better, because it would probably have like super strength or whatever, and no aches and pains or anything. What does society look like that far down the line? Where do you go from there? Because it's almost like part of the interesting maybe philosophy of this kind of development, and you don't necessarily know where it's going to go. Maybe you can't predict where it's going to go, because China's probably going to go all in, because like in every kind of way that would give them an edge, right? Because I think it's probably fair to say that China will do whatever it takes to win. So what wouldn't they do, or what's off limits to them if they want to win that badly? So you're looking at maybe 100% or 90+% AI and robotics implementation into every sector of society. Humans don't work jobs anymore, or at least don't work traditional style jobs. And it's almost at that point, do humans go through an identity crisis of having to figure out, like, because from a faith perspective, there's more that gives you purpose to life. Like, there's more important things in your job, right? Like, when you have like a biblical worldview, hopefully you're not going to look to your job as the reason that you exist, or that your purpose goes beyond your job. So for some people that don't have a strong faith background, they may just like not know what to do with themselves, because like, what, we don't work, we don't have like jobs, like how do I feel useful, how do I participate, how do I have purpose in my life, whatever people might think, right? And have those cold realizations about, like, what do you really believe, right? What are you really putting your faith in? What are you investing in, etc. And so at that point now, people have to kind of figure out, what are we all about? What are we all about, right? And so once you go that far down the line, do humans just invest in... I was having a conversation a while ago, or a text back and forth on Minect with this one guy about... It was about this kind of, I think, a similar topic to this. I think we messaged about like quantum computing, and I think AI and stuff, like something around like the context of the future of work or whatever. This kind of conversation. And I think he probably said something along the lines of that humans will find new jobs to do, or something like that. Like, it was more of an optimistic perspective. And like, do humans just go mainly in the creative side, like the practical side, the practical need for humans to do labor and stuff, probably done away with in like 80 years or whatever the timeline is? It's probably exponentially sooner than 80 years, just with how quickly things ramp up and advance nowadays. Do humans like just resort to doing just creative stuff? Because like, you can make an argument for AI can't necessarily create an original idea. It just, like, as far as I've heard from people that talk about this, is that it's just like combination of different known things to make something new, but it's not necessarily like a new original creative idea. And you could even make the argument that, what is truly new? Because is it possible that everything that humans make is inspired from something? So is anything an original idea truly at its core? And, whatever element that humans have to create something, does AI possess it to that same level? Or could they ever possess it to that same level of that level of human creativity to make like new-ish things, however you want to accurately describe that? And if AI did also control the creative space as well, does everything just kind of become like a bland slop in the end? I think I had this mental image come to mind earlier today of like, what is like, I think it was something along the lines of the ultimate extent of like, I might have been thinking about the doom scrolling from the perspective of just like mindlessly scrolling through content, not like from like the negative news absorption version of doom scrolling, but what I may have thought that it meant. Like, let's use the example of like just like endlessly scrolling on TikTok. Does it get to the point, especially like with AI, and if people put like chips in their heads, Neuralink, whatever, does it get to the point where like people become so numbed out, especially if you have robotics or cyborg stuff in your head that controls like dopamine receptors or release or whatever? Do you get to the point where people are literally just numbed out, like drooling on themselves all the time because they just open the dopamine valve and let it fly and just stay there perpetually, or pump in higher levels of dopamine, so you're just like a junkie that in the end of all of this super technological optimization and installation, do we just become like kind of mindless zombies staring at a blank white neon screen, or white neon whatever, as like our brains are just like cooked with dopamine or whatever, and that's just existence? Like, that's like a cold, dark science fiction hypothesis. Hopefully that is not the case, because that'd be bad. And like, what would it be like for people that choose to opt out of that? Are we going to see like COVID 2.0 there? COVID 2.0 in the sense of like the rhetoric and like oh, you're part of the problem because you didn't do the things we told you to do, etc., etc. You want to do your own thing and your own research or whatever, and you're part of the problem, whatever people would say. Like, because I had this idea for, I don't know if it was an idea for a movie or something like that, where it's like a time where technology becomes so advanced that then like the government, like a scenario where like, what if the government went after the Amish people for not wanting to integrate with with like advanced technological society or whatever? And he's like, is that what happens with AI implementation, where if people are like, you know what, we ain't about that. I just hit my mic probably. If people are like, you know what, we ain't about that life, we don't want this cyborg brain chip AI implementation and cyborg robotization of us and of our lives and of our society, we are going to politely opt out, then do those people get labeled as part of the problem and then like put in jail or fined into oblivion or whatever you want to say that accurately represents how that would play out? Like, do they become like ostracized for not wanting to play ball, right? This is and the part about this is we don't necessarily know what's going to happen, because it could all go this way and maybe worse, or it could not, and maybe all of this bad stuff misses us and actually goes optimistically. But when you have organizations like the UN and NATO and the World Economic Forum especially, we get all these people that like, are their motives good? And so if their motives are not good, then how would they try to use this stuff? Right? Like, there's that phrase, absolute power corrupts absolutely. or something like that. Ultimately, God is sovereign, and His will be done. We potentially are in for a interesting ride, and we don't necessarily know where it's going to go or how it's going to end. Well, I mean, technically, like, the believers know how it's going to end, in a matter of speaking. That if you're with Christ, in the end you win. So, well, you win because He wins, or He has already won. He's already got the victory. So, depending on what it is that you believe, it could either, in the end, you might think it's going to look really good or really bad. So we don't find out unless we die before then, But anyway, we are potentially becoming more and more disconnected from reality all the time. The symptoms of that seem to be popping up more and more.